In May 1856, a routine construction project in Burlington, Iowa, uncovered something that would challenge the very foundations of American history if anyone had paid attention. Beneath the busy streets, workers unearthed a sealed chamber containing human remains of extraordinary size, arranged with precision and accompanied by artifacts that suggested immense wealth and power. Newspapers of the time hinted at the unbelievable, yet the discovery vanished almost immediately, buried under progress and public indifference. What the pioneers stumbled upon was not just an archaeological oddity, it was a challenge to accepted narratives of the continent's past, a story conveniently erased from history. The Burlington Anomaly of 1856. May 1856. The American Midwest is screaming toward the future. Burlington, Iowa, isn't just a quiet river settlement anymore. It is a machine of progress, a roaring engine of manifest destiny situated on the western banks of the Mississippi. The Burlington and Missouri River Railroad is carving its way west, turning the city into a critical artery for the nation's transit network. The air is thick with coal smoke and the dust of construction. Everywhere you look, the landscape is being torn apart and rebuilt to accommodate the insatiable demand for commerce. This is a boomtown in its rawest form, where the future is being built directly on top of a past that no one quite understands. In the center of this chaotic expansion stands Governor James W. Grimes. As the third governor of Iowa, Grimes represents the political and social elite, a man elected by the so-called wisest men of the state. But today, his focus is not on legislation or statecraft. He is acting as a private developer, commissioning a massive commercial building at the strategic intersection of Main and Valley streets. This is high-profile real estate, intended to be a monument to modern American enterprise. To build a foundation that can support such an ambition, his crews have to dig deep. The labor force at the site consists of professional workmen, men accustomed to the heavy clay and limestone bluffs of Des Moines County. They dig past the topsoil, past the layers of pioneer debris, and down into the geological strata that should have been untouched by human hands. But as they reach the lower depths of the cellar, the rhythm of the excavation breaks. Their pickaxes and shovels stop cutting through earth and strike something solid. It resists them. This is not a random boulder or a shelf of natural limestone. It is a deliberate obstruction, resting at a depth that defies explanation. The crew clears away the surrounding soil, expecting perhaps an old foundation or a forgotten root cellar. Instead, they uncover a structure that silences the job site. It is a masonry vault, perfectly square, measuring 10 feet by 10 feet. This is not a crude hole in the ground lined with loose rocks. The walls are 14 inches thick, built with a precision that rivals the best stonemasons of Europe. What truly baffles the observers is the material holding the stones together. The report describes it as cement or indestructible mortar. In the mid-19th century, this term suggests a high-quality lime-based mixture or even an asphaltum binder, reminiscent of the ancient engineering techniques found in Mesopotamia or Rome. The workmen strike it, but the bond holds. This mortar was designed to last for millennia, sealing the interior against moisture, time, and the weight of the earth above. Even more perplexing is the shape of the roof. The vault is capped with a true arch, rising 6 feet from the floor to the apex. Architectural historians of the time operate under the assumption that the indigenous populations of the upper Mississippi Valley never developed the physics of the Keystone Arch. Yet here, buried beneath the governor's commercial ambitions, lies a sophisticated architectural feat that requires a mastery of load distribution and geometry. The workmen at the corner of Main and Valley streets are staring at an impossibility. They have unearthed a fortress that, according to the textbooks of 1856, has no right to exist. Occupants of the sealed chamber. The workmen stand at the precipice of the unknown. The masonry wall, that barrier of indestructible mortar, is finally breached. The stale air of centuries rushes out, replaced by the humid breath of 1856 Loa. What lies inside is not a chaotic heap of refuse or a simple grave. It is a tableau frozen in time, a scene of deliberate order that demands immediate respect. Arranged with evident care within the 10-foot square vault are 8 human skeletons. This is not a mass grave from a forgotten battle or a haphazard pile from a plague. The arrangement speaks of ceremony, of reverence, of a high-status interment designed to endure the ages, and endure it did. Thanks to the sophisticated engineering of the arch and the chemical seal of the mortar, the chamber has acted as a time capsule, protecting its contents from the crushing weight of the earth and the rot of the damp soil. The local press, specifically the Burlington, Iowa Gazette, does not mince words about what happens next. Their reporter, witnessing the scene alongside the construction crew, makes a claim that will relegate this discovery to the fringes of history for the next century and a half. They describe the skeletons as being of gigantic proportions. The Gazette goes on record with a specific, quantifiable observation, stating that these, adventure to say, are the largest human remains ever found, being over 8 feet long. Now, before you roll your eyes at the height and dismiss this as another tall tale from the frontier, you must consider the specific context of the report. In the mid-19th century, digging up Native American mounds was a common, albeit destructive, pastime. Settlers often found bones that crumbled to dust upon contact with the air, making accurate measurement impossible and inviting exaggeration. But the Burlington case was fundamentally different. The report emphasizes the good state of preservation. The bones were not dust. They were not fragmented splinters mixed with clay. They were articulated, solid, and measurable. When the Gazette says 8 feet, they are not guessing the length of a decomposed shadow in the dirt. They are measuring a physical structure that has survived intact. This level of preservation suggests the vault created a unique microenvironment, perhaps even an anaerobic one, that halted the natural decay processes that usually claim skeletal remains in the acidic soil of the Midwest. The airtight nature of that indestructible mortar essentially mummified the environment, if not the flesh itself, allowing for a measurement of total articulated length that is rarely possible in American archaeology. But the size of the occupants is only half the story. The artifacts found with them paint a picture of immense power and reach. The largest of the skeletons was found clasping a pearl ornament in its fingers, a final gesture of wealth that survived death itself. Traces of woven cloth were found at the feet of the remains, a rarity in North American archaeology where textiles almost always disintegrate, and scattered among them were copper implements. These items are the fingerprints of the Hopewell exchange system, a vast trade network that flourished between 200 BCE and 500 CE. The copper did not come from Iowa. It was mined hundreds of miles away in the Lake Superior region, hammered into shape by artisans who understood the properties of metal. The pearls were likely harvested from the freshwater mussels of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. The presence of these exotic goods confirms that these were not isolated villagers. They were the elite. The giants of Burlington were likely the kings or high priests of a civilization that spanned half a continent. The copper and pearls were status symbols, markers of their ability to command resources from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. When you combine the biological anomaly of their stature with the technological anomaly of the vault and the economic power represented by the artifacts, you are left with a disturbing conclusion. Governor Grimes's workmen had not just found a grave, they had stumbled into the royal crypt of a lost American dynasty. The silence of the experts. The news of the Burlington vault traveled faster than a locomotive. The story did not merely linger in Iowa. It was picked up by newspapers in Michigan, copied by editors in Georgia, and discussed in parlors across the fracturing nation. In 1856, a discovery of this magnitude, 8 giants in a Roman-style vault, should have summoned the leading minds of the day. You would expect a delegation from the East Coast, professors from Yale or Harvard, or at least a frantic telegram from the nascent scientific societies of the time, but no one came. The silence from the scientific establishment was deafening. To understand why, you must understand the war being fought over American history in the mid-19th century. This was the era of the mound builder myth. Popular culture believed that the complex earthworks of the Midwest were built by a lost white race, or perhaps the 10 lost tribes of Israel, anyone but the ancestors of the Native Americans. As institutional science began to professionalize, there was a concerted effort to crush this myth. The emerging orthodoxy wanted to establish a clean, linear history of the continent. A stone vault containing 8-foot giants did not fit the narrative. It was too anomalous, too strange, and too dangerous to the developing timeline. So, the experts simply looked the other way. However, the disappearance of the Burlington evidence was not necessarily a grand conspiracy orchestrated by shadowy figures in Washington. It was something far more mundane and far more effective: passive erasure. Governor James Grimes was not an archaeologist. He was a businessman and a politician. He had a hole in the ground that was costing him money every day it sat open. In 1856, there were no federal preservation laws. There was no historical register, no number to call to report a find of national significance. There was only the relentless pressure of a construction schedule. Once the reporter from the Gazette had scribbled his notes and the locals had gawked at the bones, the reality of the situation took over. The vault was an obstruction. The skeletons were debris. The construction crew likely did what construction crews have done for millennia. They cleared the site. The bones were almost certainly distributed among the onlookers, souvenirs for private cabinets of curiosity, destined to be lost in attics or thrown out by grandchildren who didn't know what they were. As for the vault itself, the indestructible mortar and the true arch were likely smashed apart or simply used as fill for the new foundation. The heavy limestone blocks of the governor's new commercial building were laid directly over the spot, sealing the anomaly back into the darkness. The most significant archaeological find of the decade was erased not by malice, but by the indifference of progress. They didn't hide it in a government warehouse. They hid it under a grocery store foundation. The architecture of the impossible. If the Burlington Vault were a solitary event, it would be easy to dismiss. We could write it off as a hoax, a mismeasurement, or the delirious exaggeration of a frontier reporter. But Burlington is not an anomaly. It is merely one coordinate on a map of impossibilities that stretches across the entire American Midwest. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, as settlers broke the sod of the heartland, they didn't just find arrowheads. They found a recurring, persistent pattern of giganticism that defies statistical probability. Travel north to Wisconsin, the so-called effigy mound capital of North America. In 1891, the New York Times reported on a dig at the Astalon site, a place famous for its pyramid-shaped earthworks that eerily resemble the structures of Mexico. While the Smithsonian official reports focused on the architecture, local accounts tell a different story. They speak of large skeletons unearthed during the excavation bones that were crated up, shipped to the National Museum in Washington, D.C., and never seen again. Go to Lake Delavan in 1912. The Peterson brothers, excavating a mound group, discovered 18 skeletons. These weren't just tall, they were biological outliers. The reports list heights ranging from 7'6" to a staggering 10 feet. The skulls were described as elongated, with facial features that bear little resemblance to the known tribes of the region. Moved to Pelican Lake in 1908. Another excavation, another giant. This individual measured 8 feet tall and was buried with a copper knife and a necklace of prehistoric animal tusks. The presence of copper again links these figures to the elite trade networks of the Great Lakes, reinforcing the idea that physical stature and social power were inextricably linked. But if Wisconsin is the capital of mounds, the Ohio Valley is the epicenter of the giants. The reports here are so numerous and so specific that they constitute a distinct data set. In 1872, in Noble County, 3 skeletons were found, all exceeding 8 feet in height. The observers noted a terrifying anatomical anomaly: double rows of teeth. Go to Muskingum County in 1880. Skeletons exceeding 9 feet were pulled from the earth. In Proctorville in 1892, a jawbone was recovered that was so massive it could fit over the face of a large modern man, like a mask. In Toledo in 1895, 20 skeletons were found with jaws twice the normal size, buried alongside bowls covered in hieroglyphs that no one could read. This is the problem with the skepticism surrounding the Iowa discovery. You can explain away one drunken reporter in Burlington. You can explain away one farmer in Wisconsin measuring a skeleton with a broken ruler. But can you explain away hundreds of reports, spanning 50 years and 3 states? Can you dismiss a pattern that consistently describes the same specific anomalies, the 8-foot stature, the double rows of teeth, the massive jaws, and the copper artifacts? When you look at the map, the Burlington Vault stops looking like a mistake. It starts looking like an outpost. It suggests that the mid-19th century pioneers were walking over a necropolis of a forgotten ruling class, a lineage of physical giants who dominated the region for centuries before vanishing into the earth. Once is an anecdote, twice is a coincidence. But 20 times across 3 states, that is not folklore. That is a data set. The forensics of the grave. Before we accept the existence of a lost race of giants, we must first interrogate the evidence with the cold, hard logic of forensics. We have to ask a fundamental question. How did a farmer in 1856 know a skeleton was 8 feet tall? He didn't have a CT scanner. He didn't have a sterile lab. He had a tape measure and a hole in the ground. In the 19th century, the standard practice for estimating height was known as the anatomical method. This involved measuring the skeleton exactly as it lay in the earth, from the top of the skull to the base of the heel. On paper, this sounds logical. In practice, it is a recipe for error. When a body decomposes, the soft tissues vanish. The cartilage discs between the vertebrae dissolve, and the ligaments holding the joints together disintegrate. Without these connectors, the bones are no longer held in tight tension. As the earth settles and shifts over centuries, the skeleton undergoes a process called taphonomic distortion. The vertebrae spread out. The gap between the hip and the femur widens. The skull can roll backward. This phenomenon is known as joint expansion. In a standard burial, the pressure of the soil can easily add several inches to the apparent length of a skeleton. A man who stood 6'2" in life might measure nearly 7 feet in the grave after 1,000 years of geological settling. Add to this the will to believe, the tendency of amateur excavators to round up measurements to fit the biblical narratives of giants, and you have a compelling argument for why so many giants were reported. In the 1800s, modern osteology rejects the in situ measurement entirely. Today, we determine stature using linear regression formulas based on the length of the long bones, specifically the femur. The femur is the longest and strongest bone in the human body, and its length correlates mathematically to total height. The standard formula used by forensic anthropologists often looks something like this. Height equals 3.06 times the length of the femur, plus 72.6 centimeters. This math removes the variable of soil shifting. It doesn't matter if the bones are scattered across the room. If you have the femur, you have the height. This scientific reality effectively debunks many of the 7-foot claims of the 19th century. A tall warrior of the Hopewell culture, expanded by soil shifting and measured by an excited amateur, becomes a giant. But here is where the debunking hits a wall. Taphonomic distortion has limits. Soil shifting can turn a 6-foot man into a 7-foot skeleton, but it cannot turn a human being into a 10-foot monster. To get a skeleton that measures 8 or 10 feet, even with significant joint expansion, you would need a femur of extraordinary length, a bone that simply does not exist in modern medical databases. The math works both ways. If the Burlington skeletons were truly 8 feet tall, their femurs would have to be roughly 60 centimeters long. That is not an error of measurement. That is a biological anomaly. While we must remain skeptical of the pioneer surveyors, We must also ask if we are arrogant enough to assume that every single report from every single county was merely a mistake of the tape measure. The biology of kings. When we strip away the layers of folklore, conspiracy, and sensationalism, we are left with a dataset that demands a rational explanation. We have reports of individuals of extraordinary size, buried in sophisticated stone vaults, surrounded by the wealth of a continent. For centuries, the debate has been binary. Either these were mythical monsters, or they were hoaxes. But there is a third possibility, one grounded in the hard realities of biology and sociology. We are looking for monsters, but perhaps we should be looking for kings. In the study of ancient societies, there is a well-documented correlation between social status and physical stature. The common people of the pre-Columbian Midwest lived lives of grueling physical labor. They were farmers and foragers, often subsisting on a diet heavy in carbohydrates and periodically subjected to famine. This lifestyle stunts growth. The bones of the commoners tell a story of stress and survival. But the occupants of the Burlington Vault were not commoners. They were the elite. They were the beneficiaries of the Hopewell exchange system, a network that funneled the best resources of the continent to the top of the social pyramid. These individuals would have had consistent access to high-quality protein, venison, fish, and nuts, and they would have been exempt from the back-breaking labor that compressed the spines of their subjects. Over generations, this nutritional privilege, combined with selective marriage within the ruling caste, could have produced a lineage of individuals who were significantly taller and more robust than the general population. To a pioneer farmer standing 5'7", a 7.5-foot Hopewell chieftain, draped in copper and pearls, would not just look like a leader, he would look like a different species. The giants were likely the biological expression of extreme social stratification, a royal caste bred for power, and they were buried like kings. The indestructible mortar found in the Burlington Vault is as significant as the bones. It implies a mastery of materials science that is often denied to North American cultures. To create a mortar that resists centuries of moisture requires the calcination of limestone or the processing of bitumen. This is chemistry. The presence of a true arch implies a knowledge of physics. The people who built the vault at Main and Valley Streets were not just digging holes, they were engineers executing a vision of permanence. We only know this because of the so-called penny press. It is easy to criticize 19th century newspapers for their breathless, sensational style. But in the case of the Iowa Giants, the Burlington Gazette is the only reason we know anything at all. The scientific institutions of the time failed to show up. The academics were too busy fighting the mound builder myth to investigate the anomalies that complicated their theories. The newspapers, for all their flaws, acted as the accidental archivists of American prehistory. They preserved the details, the height, the mortar, the pearls that the experts were too arrogant to record. We are left with a fragmented picture, but it is enough to see the outline of a lost dynasty that once ruled the heartland. The final lost data point. The story of the Burlington Vault is not merely a ghost story. It is a tragedy of lost knowledge. We have traded the physical evidence of the past for the convenience of the present. The 8 skeletons that lay in that stone chamber represented a crucial data point in the history of this continent, a physical link to a time when kings of extraordinary stature ruled the river valleys. But because they did not fit the narrative of the 19th century, and because they stood in the way of a new commercial block, they were discarded. We are left only with questions and the uneasy feeling that our history books are incomplete. As we drive over the paved streets of our modern cities, we must wonder what other anomalies were ground into dust before they could be understood.